Bear character or semi-human on his stage, but I'm going to hand over my microphone to Smokey.
Cool, man. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this like not too muffled? Good. Fuck yeah. Alrighty. Thanks so much for coming out, and thanks for entertaining me in a bear mask. We've made this a little bit of a staple at past conferences, but that was Dev Bear kicking it off first with the Modular Summit. And now Scott and I are going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. We talked originally about the topic being around why L1s are bad, and the proposal for the name of the talk was why L1s are cucks. But we figured that was not the right word in Korean. In fact, it translated into something that one of the event planners told us was much worse. So rather, we're going to talk about why chains as a whole will not win unless they're specialized in some meaningful manner. So Scott, do you want to talk us through a little bit about what Argus is? It's not neither a chain, it's not an L1 or an L2, it's a third special thing?
Yeah, so I think to kind of quickly introduce Argus here. We are a crypto gaming company, but I would say we're probably the most over-engineered crypto gaming company that exists in this space. While a lot of crypto gaming companies, they would just basically kind of build they build a game and then they think about the blockchain side as an afterthought. We think that the blockchain protocol design and blockchain architecture really goes hand in hand in what you can do with a game, and so you can't really separate these two. It's basically trying to separate, imagine trying to build some traditional computer games back in the 1980s, but you say you don't want to build software, you don't want to build the existing engine because back then there wasn't any. So I think we're in a very similar stage with crypto games right now, and one of the biggest things that we do at Argus is we have a dedicated R&D lab that is focused in core blockchain protocol engineering, and what we do there is we built our own rollup that is designed from bottom up for games and games only. While a lot of the other chains really want to build a blockchain that basically solves all life problems, including cancer. We were just yeah, fuck it, we'll only just do games and nothing else. And that's basically how we are able to build games and crypto games, on-chain games specifically, that other game studios in the space are not able to build. And that's the TLDR.
Yeah, you'd have failed the YC interview, but we love that otherwise. 2 minutes. I'm fucking with you, Scott.
Love to see it.
So okay, what is it that makes you guys, I guess, able to do what other platforms let's say AVAX subnets or any of the 20 other chains that tell me about gaming being the future every day are not able to do?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're able to do is build for instance a fully gamified blockchain system. While other viewers, let's say you're just using an existing L1. The only thing you can do with that is just basically, I don't know, mint a bunch of NFTs and that's pretty much if you ask every single crypto gaming companies in the space, most of them, and you'll ask them what are you actually doing with crypto on your games, and they'll give you basically the same answer. And so how are you supposed to really stand out regards to everyone else if you're just doing the same exact thing, right? And so that's the approach that we kind of take very differently. We think that a lot of the kind of unlocks in the novel things that we're able to do exist on a protocol level. That's why we are spending a lot of resources in building our own chain. One of the key things that we're able to do as well that most other gaming companies are not able to do in the space is to build fully on-chain games. And by building a fully on-chain game, we're able to open up the design space for platformization that existing NFT on-chain only games does not have. Yeah.
So you're telling me that my Z-Run NFTs are not going to make it back?
I would say that's a very challenging pitch. I think a lot of people these days, I think a lot of crypto gaming studios, a lot of them, especially in this market, have quickly realized that building a crypto game with NFT is no longer a viable pitch. Everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's saying that their game will be fun and this time it will be different. But that's the same thing everyone is saying, and I think we're at a point where crypto VCs are just yeah, you're just the same. You're not special, and yeah.
Yeah, so they ran out. They're oh, I can only burn so much money in a given time frame, so I need to pace this,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I think I want to talk about actually very interesting like sauce in the room here that is Berachain. And I don't know if you guys heard, but the chain does not exist. And so like, do you want to tell more about the chain that does not exist, Bera?
Yeah. So Berachain is sort of an extended social experiment sponsored by one of the Harvard research labs. Berachain is an EVM-compatible L1 built on top of the Cosmos SDK. Our whole thesis is that you can effectively actually solve the traverse incentives that typically exist in chains nowadays between security and liquidity through, I guess, a little bit of interesting validator protocol interaction. The way that effectively works for us is that while Berachain is its own full VM, EVM compatible, et cetera, the only way to gain the governance and staking token of the network, BGT, is by providing liquidity to a set of core DeFi primitives that are built into the chain. That starts with effectively an AMM/DEX, a perps vault, and a stablecoin issuing/lending platform. And over time can actually expand to any smart contract on the chain. So the part that we're most excited about and interested in is the ability to actually have validators and protocols work together and have the chain effectively powering the protocols building on top of it. Because, and Scott and I were talking about this before, perhaps it's non-PC or a controversial take or whatever it is. But I think that in the vast majority of cases right now, no one actually cares about whether a chain is highly decentralized, highly secure, or highly scalable. They actually just care about where you can find liquidity and where you can find users. And I think you can very much see a hot ball of capital going from chain to chain to chain, trying to find that effective user base. And they don't really know if it exists. Our goal was really to build a network that allows liquidity to serve as a form of security, because we really do believe that's, I'd say the lifeblood of on-chain activity. And build an environment in which applications that are building on the chain are actually incentivized and powered to be there, right? It's not just how many grants can we throw at you, how many tokens can we get you to burn. It's, do you have a reason to exist there that can be unique to that ecosystem and isn't just obsoleted by moving to Arbitrum in 3 months, right? So I think that's what we care about most at Berachain. And we've been lucky to work with great folks like Scott along the way, and they'll be working with us with, I guess, using our VM Polaris, which we can happily show at a later point.
Cool, yeah. I guess I want to double click on your point with regards to I think generalized L1s and how they really try to capture market share, or really even just getting people to build on it was through these basically just flinging a shit ton of money at oftentimes non-aligned developers. Yeah. And just leading up to basically having a chain where oh yeah, sure, a bunch of people are trying to pump it, and then it's just basically gone because nothing is sticky, pun intended. And then what do you think? How do you think about these ecosystem development and kind of these specialized kind of chains, right? How does a specialized chain allow allow you to attract developers that otherwise wouldn't basically be interested on your chain, because it just does the same thing as everything else?
Yeah, I think having some sort of entrenched advantage or way that the chain can, do something for the protocols goes a long way, and I think that's a very milquetoast take. But 9 out of 10 times, I think we hear people talk about TPS on one hand. I think we've yet to see many cases in which we actually see TPS making a meaningful difference when it comes to the actual sophistication and volume of on-chain players. We've seen probably some interesting stuff in Solana DeFi. I know that's been a meme here and there, but I think there's something to be seen there. I think we'll probably see some interesting stuff with Monad down the road. But I actually think that in very few cases we've seen the scaling solutions actually make a difference in the level of applications that can be built, right? Perhaps you rebalance a vault more effectively, or perhaps you can trade a little bit faster, and perhaps your arbitrage game is a little bit better, but I don't think it's been reinventing the wheel. From our side, it's more, can you build a protocol that is uniquely reliant on the mechanisms of a given chain in a way that cannot be replicated on another one, right? So I'll give a relatively standard example of something that would work on Berachain. Since I mentioned that the validators effectively act as directors of emissions, or LP, within the chain, you can actually have protocols that work directly with validators to bootstrap their own liquidity. So in contrast to the typical cycle that I think you see in a number of ecosystems nowadays, where it's hey, I'm going to make a DEX, maybe it's a Unifork, maybe it's a Camelot fork, whatever. Then I'm going to make a V token that gets some of the fees. Then I'm going to make an aggregator, or sorry, a liquid staking version for that token, and then an aggregator, and then a bribe layer. It's okay, cool. 5 double-counted TVL protocols later, what do you have? You have a way for protocols to achieve liquidity at a relatively low price point. So we actually built bribes directly into the validator layer, such that a protocol that's trying to get off the ground can actually work with the validator, say, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of my token, Bera, whatever the fuck it is, And in exchange, the validator is going to direct Y amount of BGT, the emissions token of the chain, towards that protocol's pool on the chain DEX, perps, label, stable vaults, et cetera. And we think that it's really interesting because on one hand, it aligns the protocol and the validator. They're contributing towards chain security. And on the other hand, they're getting capital at a relatively low cost in the form of emissions from the staking token of a network, which should hopefully be more deflationary over time if we don't really fuck it up. So I think that areas where the chain can be useful for protocols on top of it, as generic as that sounds, is really what we think about and what can attract the right class of developers. And I think you'll have another massive set that's like, cool, who's going to throw 50K at me? And that's fine, and I'd actually rather self-select that group out because I don't think mercenary capital has much of a place in this like non-ZERP environment.
Cool. I think like kind of like another, I think like I would say like main question with like a lot of these like specialized chains, right? It's like how do you kind of really draw the balance between like your role as like the labs company play within the ecosystem? Are you supposed to be like playing kind of like a more like big government role of like basically kind of building out the protocols or kind of and like or like would you kind of just like basically build the core primitives and like build the chain like core protocol and let emergent behavior form around it and have like the community and developers really kind of like try to kind of like play around with this basically kind of unique primitives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, man. I think about it a lot in the term of sort of like guided or controlled entropy, in that you don't want to be like a Fed chain, you don't want to be a big brother chain, you don't want to be building everything because I think that takes the root of composable or just other rough ecosystems where everything is home cooked and there's actually no new players coming into the market and it's just like a weird internal knife fight that doesn't accomplish much, right? I think that the ideal is actually where you sort of help guide the direction of the chaos, but you let people build as they wish, right? So take more of like an arm the rebels approach there. Help people have the tools to build cool shit, give them as much dev tooling, access to liquidity, access to market makers, liquid funds, exchanges, whatever, like, be their concierge in some way, but don't actually do the work for them, right? So when we think about that, it's making sure the builders have everything they need to strive, even when that's like, legal stuff or helping with, setting up different foundations and, back office and stuff that lots of first-time founders haven't done before, but not like doing the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, I think this is like a very strong point as well. I think like one of the things that I feel like a lot of these like large L1 ecosystem or like kind of these like people trying to build new blockchains that they don't really think about like what is kind of like really kind of the vibe of like the chain, right? I feel like a lot of these chains, they're very sterile. They're like this is kind of like an extension of kind of really the specialization kind of like part, right? Because like a chain that really try to appeal to everyone, a chain that tries to be like basically do everything, is not a very kind of memorable kind of like chain, right? Wherein like in contrast to like chains like for instance like Berachain, you're really kind of leaning onto that very kind of like degen vibes and like kind of really leaning onto that like kind of like DeFi kind of like narrative. And I think that's like a very powerful tool to kind of like really unlock this like mind share that I don't think like other chains are able to develop, right? And like Berachain obviously like raised a shit ton of money, but like there are like L1s and L2s that raise many times more shit ton of money, but they don't even come close to having like fractions of the mind share just because of like how powerful that like kind of like core community and core brand and core like just identity of like people who are developing and like kind of contributing to that chain is. Yeah.
No, thank you, man. I think I think it's important to be T-shaped when building a chain, because it's very tough, I think, to win right now as a jack of all trades or like Swiss Army knife chain, if you will. Because I think if that's the case, right, like why wouldn't you just deploy on Ether, Arbitrum, et cetera, right? Like there's great liquidity. There's, as long as you're not too concerned about gas prices, et cetera, then you go to Arbitrum, right? There's a community, what have you. But I think it's very much if you know that there's a focus area or some aspect that you can have an edge in, then, build the edge and expand horizontally as you need, right? So yeah, I think like we've been lucky in terms of cultivating an early DeFi community, a group that's fairly risk on, but is also, very interested in NFTs, GameFi, everything in between. But we know that there's an area that we can probably hang our hat on more than anything else, and that is really thinking about the effective, I'd say, driving utility towards liquidity beyond simply serving as liquidity, right? So yeah, we're really excited to see how it plays out. I think we got a long way to go. I think I'll keep on bullying you to turn into a roll-up on Berachain, that weekly discussion, as one must. But we're pretty excited for what can be done with that down the road as well, right? Like there's groups that could actually just build their own side chains that roll up to Berachain and draw on that liquidity sink at the core of the chain and actually have their own, I'd say their contracts powered by the core, set there. So I'm pretty excited about what that could turn into for us.
I guess kind of like for the audience, I know I often get this kind of like question a lot on my Twitter on like where I think there is like interesting design space for like specialized chains. I think that might be like something that we can kind of just go rapid fire on. I think like some of the most interesting design space for like a chain right now is I think a lot of the lever right now I think is focused on like, hey, how can we make faster chain and like how faster chain can like unlock more applications. But I think there are also like crop of like design space for like a specialized blockchain that doesn't actually necessarily revolve around like just plain and simple like more scale and more speed, right? Like there are things like, oh yeah, just the fact that like now you have like more like basically an enshrined protocol system that makes it easier for a certain kind of like user onboarding, right? So that, like at Argus, for instance, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can design a blockchain that makes it even easier for us to onboard developers, right? Like while other game studios are just like struggling, trying to deal with EVM, trying to deal with like vanilla, like EVM, vanilla, like or Solana or whatsoever, trying to kind of come up with clues on how to fix the kind of onboarding problem. We're able to kind of just like go like one step deeper onto like the even blockchain design and blockchain architecture itself. To make kind of like things like account abstraction much more cleaner and much more idiomatic to like how like a user would think about identities, right? So for instance, like the concept like a wallet address, the 0x like hex encoded like addresses are really kind of like a pain in the ass to teach to users. And like one of the things that we're able to do then is like, okay, like we realize that a lot of game developers already understand the concept of like a gamer tag if you've played like Xbox. Or you kind of concept of like an in-game nickname, IGN, right? And so like, why not use that as like an identifier on your chain? And that alone just like allows us to like solve like basically this like kind of like common kind of like really kind of like cop out for a lot of these like crypto gaming companies, which is like blaming onboarding for a lack of like user adoption, right? And so like that's kind of like I think the really really interesting angles there that is like beyond scaling, because I think like even then with scaling, there's a lot of really interesting ways that you can build a much more scalable chains if you're actually opinionated of like what the chain is going to be used for. Because I think like for some of the people who are like non-engineers here, often don't realize is that like trying to kind of like scale a very generalized system or like trying to build a generalized system onto itself is incredibly hard, and that really kind of limits your latitude in terms of the things that your engineering team are able to do and the things that you're really able to kind of design into the protocol as well. And so like I think that's really kind of my thing, right? I think like I think there is a lot of really interesting design space in like kind of specialized blockchains in terms of how specialized use cases unlocks better like much like orders of magnitude of more scalability than existing solutions, and also how it can also solve problems that really is inherited by that generalization, kind of, for instance, like the account abstraction problem. I'm kind of curious in terms of like where you're seeing a lot of these like interesting kind of like design space are for like specialized chains.
Yeah, man. I think that we're seeing it's kind of a little bit towards the same point as you noted, in that right now I think there's like 20,000 users that are actually kind of doing something on chain. Of that, there's maybe 2,000 power users, and there's just a bunch of bots doing a bunch of nonsense. And at some point, you actually do need to be able to grow the pie, as much of a meme as that is. And I do think that the next million users narrative has always been kind of bullshit, because I don't think the next million users want to be like using crypto right now. I think that it's a little bit of like a pariah term / a pariah industry as a whole. But I do think that either way, if we want people to come in the door at some point and the industry to grow, the user experience has to be meaningfully improved, right? So again, as much of a meme as intents are, I think they're actually kind of interesting in terms of being able to say, like, hey, I'm putting in A, I want B out. I don't care what happens in the interim, but like let my input-output machine function, right? Mm-hmm. So then groups like Anoma are doing cool stuff there. And I'll definitely keep an eye on that space as a whole. I think that the move ecosystem is also pretty interesting. I think that we've seen a lot of chains fail to take off, or a lot of groups fail to fully take off there from a liquidity point of view. But I've rarely talked to devs that actually don't enjoy like building with Move. In fact, like I think it's been one of like the most sort of like ubiquitously positive experiences that I've heard about. But again, limited by actual like current liquidity and market feasibility, right?
Yep.
And I know they're also pushing a lot on the gaming angle, but I think there's something to be said there, both about security, ease of use,
Yep.
TPS, yada yada yada.
Yep.
Again, bit of a meme when it comes to TPS, but theoretically there's something there, right?
Yep.
I just don't think we've actually seen anything on chain that has like pushed much stuff to its very limits as of yet. Right, apart from maybe random airdrops, and it's like, okay, cool, like, Arbitrum airdrop's gonna crash the thing, or like ZK Sync airdrop's gonna be fucked, like now what, right? So I think that there's the most area to be gained in sort of the UX process, for sure. I think that TPS has a role, but I just don't think we're there as of yet. And I'm sure that'll be part of the equation at the end of the day. I also think that there's interesting stuff in the realm of like collaborative privacy. And basically allowing people to permission access to information in a manner that's not just like, hey, this is like a, an untrackable chain effectively, or like a, secret network, or, like a tornado style thing, but more like, hey, I will selectively allow X or Y party to have access to my information at a chain state level. Because I think that gets really cool from like sort of an institutional subnet, from like any sort of a later stage capital group that actually needs to be aware of counterparty risk and anyone who they're working with, right? So actually something like that has been, I've seen a couple groups cooking up cool stuff there, super early stages, but I think broadly UX and controlled privacy get very interesting down the road for like mature adoption.
Got it. I guess like kind of like one thing that I think is kind of a really interesting kind of discussion point is with like I think like for many kind of like years, we've seen kind of people building chains more as kind of these like generalized chains, right? I think this is really kind of like habit that kind of like come like really born, I guess, like from Bitcoin. Also, Bitcoin is actually, if you want to like think about it that way, is actually a specialized chain. And like after Ethereum, everyone's just basically cargo culting Ethereum. Everyone's just trying to build it like the next Ethereum, right? Well, that's like the 2018, like 2019, like like Rush was like, oh yeah, we want to build like a better Ethereum. Like there's a bunch of projects that until this day still trying to do this like displaced Ethereum kind of like meme. And I think like only until very recently, I think there is again like these like realization, and there's a rush to actually build kind of like specialized blockchains, right? I think like some of those catalysts being like things like modular blockchain narrative being kind of like a meme that is like now pervasive in kind of the space, and like with modular blockchain, the whole like I would say the whole philosophy was to basically build chains that are like like really mix and match. It's like you have Lego blocks for a blockchain, and now you can have like you can basically build these like customized and specialized chains much easier than like I think like what most people would be able to like kind of imagine, right? And I think like one of the jokes that I think like a lot of the like people on Twitter like to use is like how like everyone is just like basically stealing Cosmos ideas and are bringing it to Ethereum. And like I think there's kind of like that elements of kind of like reality here as well with regards to kind of like kind of modular blockchains or like specialized blockchains where like the philosophy of Cosmos, I think like with app chains and like these like specializations and all of that, I actually think like are actually starting to kind of like bear fruition, and like we're starting to see a lot of these kind of like developers actually forming kind of like a shelling point that like there's a lot of like really design space for kind of the for like these like specialized blockchains. And most importantly, I think like when we're talking about these infrastructures and like these new chains, I think like it's also important to have the conversation of like how these new infrastructure or new chains are going to like lead to like basically become the catalyst for the next kind of like Renaissance era for like applications on a blockchain, and like
Yeah, I think that's actually the bigger question, right? It's okay, cool. We can build new infrastructure. We can always invest in infrastructure because that's kind of like passing the buck in the most like beautiful VC way possible. It's like, okay, cool. Like I don't have to take a bet that this is going to work. I have to take a bet that someone else believes that this is going to work and then builds on top of it. And I can say that because I'm building an L1, so it's chill. I'm self-aware. But broadly, I think that investing in infrastructure or building infrastructure is a little bit of a meme as well, right? Because I think what we've seen the least of over the last few years is real use cases and real apps that find product market fit. I very much believe that a chain is the sum of the dApps that are built on top of it. And I think in many cases, those are unremarkable or are clones of that which already exists on ETH or somewhere else, right? So I guess the question that I often think about a lot, and I don't have a great answer to this as of yet, because I think there's maybe sub 10 dApps in crypto that have actually found PMF at some point in their cycles, right? I think there's a lot of fluff, and I think there's a lot of like over-specialized things that don't actually have an audience at the moment. But like, it's really what will these new like consensus layers, what will these new drag and drop like build a blockchain systems actually enable, right? And you know, what does that mean for users at the end of the day? Because I think as engineers, as builders, what have you, it's very easy to get married to the creative process and the technical process, and like, hey, I'm gonna build this sick new thing. I'm gonna like, it's perfect for me. I'm gonna love it. But then it's tough to sometimes zoom out and say, okay, cool, what do people actually need and what do people actually care about? So I guess the question I'd pose back to you, Scott, is like, what do you think this next generation of modular technology, specialized chains, et cetera, will ideally enable? Is it, better trading? Is it, gaming? Is it art? Is it fuckery of all sorts? Like, what's the end game?
Yeah, so I think like the best answer I can give you there is that I don't know, and I want to keep it that way, right? When I think Ethereum was created, we don't know that DeFi will be a thing. We didn't know that like basically kind of like NFTs are going to be a thing. We don't even know like DEXs. We're going to be like kind of like basically the major consumer of block space, right? And so the key thing here is that now we have more information in terms of like how people are using blockchains. However, we still don't know of like how our applications are actually going to kind of like really come up, right? And so like the best way to kind of really position kind of like yourself, in my opinion, is to basically like provide these core primitives and like realize that hey, like things are going to come out of this. And like when that moment happens, you want to make sure that you are like in the right position to capitalize on that kind of like paradigm shift. And so this is kind of like I think that the biggest problem that I feel like a lot of like people in this space is trying to work on is like they really try to lean onto this like it's like some oracle like figure that like will say oh yeah this will be the next narrative, this will be the narrative. But like in reality like we've never actually seen like people predict NFT is going to be a thing. Like we've never seen anyone predict that like, I don't know, like, these like crazy DeFi stuff was going to be like a thing, right? Nobody kind of like thought DeFi summer was going to happen in like 1 year or 2 year. So every time people talk about crypto games and like they say, oh yeah, we're going to have 1 billion user once we have like, better onboarding and better users. I would actually push back and I would say that like, how do you know that like, the form of like, crypto games are actually going to take off is like this like skeuomorphic idea of like basically application design, right? Because like a bunch of people in 2018 tried to build Amazon on like Amazon on the blockchain, but we quickly realized that these skeuomorphic applications doesn't really take off, and it was like actually a novel and crypto native like 0 to 1 kind of like application design was the one that actually captured a lot of like the mind share.
No, I think that's super valid, man. And I think I share a lot of the same takes, sadly, which is that I don't think we have a good answer as of yet. And sometimes that's like a little bit doomerish for the sake of our industry, right? But other times, I think you can think about all the use cases that are enabled and a lot of the things that we can do right now that get very interesting. I think one of the things that like I think about the most nowadays is like stablecoins and how those just get very interesting from like a third world like developing country point of view. And even though we may not have perfect infrastructure, we're seeing more and more institutions coming on board. We're seeing PayPal get involved. We're seeing FDUSD go everywhere. Yeah, I think we'll probably see a lot more evolutions on that side over the next few months. And sometimes all the applications seem super simple and things that are like, okay, does this need to be on chain? Which is probably the question I ask most frequently if like almost anything crypto.
Yeah.
I do believe that there's an end game where some of those tech innovations actually move in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think like I think a lot of people really try to kind of like oh yeah, like what should I build next? What should I build next? Like what is the next string and whatsoever? And I think like the best answer to that is really just like fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
Like I think like that is like the best thing I can kind of really give us an answer because like when I first started my journey into like crypto games, I built like one of the first fully on-chain game called like Dark Forest, and I didn't know that again fully on-chain games are going to become this like entirely new category until like now like where everyone else want to like basically build like fully on-chain games and everyone want to like fund like fully on-chain games and whatsoever. But like yeah, I think like we're on time here, and I don't want to get canceled by the organizer. So yeah.
That's valid. That's valid.
You know, like France is like staring at me right now.
Yeah. France is gonna shoot us after, bro.
All right.
Thank you
good?
so much, guys.
All
That's
right.
us talking trash about Generalized L1s.
Thank you very much.